Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are kind of going to explore the context aspect that's becoming very top of mind for different customers of ours and also in the general marketplace. What is it? And kind of what the readiness for that might look like. Really, the thesis statement here is agents have intelligence, but they really understand your business, right? We'll kind of start there and kind of go into a little bit of the details. My name is Nandagopal Jayaram, founder CEO, 20 years this year, CoStrategix, since I founded it back in 2006. And overall, I have about 32 years of experience. I have a user-friendly handle. You can just call me Nan. And today we'll kind of look at, why has context become so important suddenly. Then we'll kind of define what the enterprise context is, and kind of also look at a demonstration with the context turned on. How does a query behave? And then with the context turned off, how does the query behave, right? Kind of take a look at that and then look at what might an architecture footprint look like, what does the readiness look like, and what's a good place to kind of get started with this, right? Is it another platform I have to buy, or is it, what is it exactly, and how do I go about? And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end and kind of conclude the journey at that point. So this is a picture of a cubicle in our office. Actually, I just took this morning. At the far end corner, you see that on-air light. That is Jeremy's cube. He's our head of the data practice, and people interrupt him as they walk in while he's on a call. So he bought this big sign, on air sign. But the thing is, he forgets to turn it off. So he's perpetually on air, right? So why do I bring this up contextually? Like I tell Audrey, who is helping us come here today. Thanks, Audrey, for that. And but basically, I tell her she usually stays. She's the last one to leave. I tell her to kind of switch off the lights, because she's the last one as I leave. And then I don't really have to give her a 15-step decision tree, right? When she does, she looks around, she knows it's late. She sees whether anyone is still working. She can still see Jeremy sometimes, and she also knows he forgets to turn it off, right? And so that's kind of what she does before she decides to take action. Now think about everything she's doing. My intent, physical surroundings, people, the history, relationships, signal, and even her knowledge of Jeremy's behavior, right? I just had to give her one simple request. The rest came from her own context. So humans carry this context innately, right? Whereas with an agent, you have intelligence, but they lack that kind of context. You gave agent a similar task, give it a calendar, you give it a sensor. Those are tools and data, but none of them by themselves give agent what Audrey's understanding of the situation is. That's kind of the general construct today. So think about that from your own business standpoint, right? The amount of context that exists and how critical that is to be captured and made available to agents, as we kind of mature the use of agents within our organization. So moving on, basically the thesis is access is not understanding. We've spent a lot of time connecting variety of different things, all the way from connecting our data warehouse to all the upstream applications, some of them even unstructured data sets and bringing all of that, the APIs and all the tools and all of that. But really, connectivity doesn't equate to a business understanding. They are fundamentally different questions. What an agent can access, all of the data, all of the documents, all of that, right? That's one part of the equation. The other part is like, does it really understand, right? And so those are the fundamental questions, and that's something that we'll tackle today. And but how do we get here, right? For decades, applications have generated transactions. So we pull all the transactions and put it into data warehouses, data lakes, and semantic layers. And then came LLMs, which changed the interface completely. They help us reason. And so therefore, agents can be used to do that and take actions. LLM by themselves do not have any context. They do not improve and begin to understand your business context, on their own. You have to do something about it. They also don't have any tools to act on. They simply, it's a algorithm that's working really well in terms of predicting the next word, right? And kind of figuring out answers to the questions that we ask. So we shouldn't forget that really. But every era has solved this problem differently. We start with transactions. We start with then, we turn that into data, and then we capturing insights and driving meaning. And now LLMs are helping, kind of put that reasoning together and then also take action. So, and the closer we get to action, the more dangerous missing business context becomes. Because if are we were to switch off the light or an agent just switch it off at 6 p.m., it's not a big deal. Somebody can go back and switch it on. But think about other mission critical systems, other business aspects. If you're allowing your agents to take those actions, you want to ground them with the right context. So that way you get exactly the outcomes you are hoping for. And there are no surprises there. So that's that, right? And so we have been capturing this sort of meaning and metadata for decades. Context itself isn't a completely new concept. We've been building pieces of it from decade standpoint. Metadata told us about data. MDMs established identity, mastering. Catalogs helped us kind of discover all the assets we have and certify those data assets. Semantic models, standardize the business meaning, and we are actively implementing semantic models even today, right? And knowledge graphs capture relationships, right? A couple of graph Neo4j type implementations, and then RAGs made enterprise knowledge, the unstructured knowledge, easily accessible to large language models. So now, the thing that's really changing is all of these things, the consumer was a human, the end consumer, other than for the vector database until recently. Now agents are the ones that are going to consume all of these things. And collectively, that kind of becomes the overall vocabulary. And speaking of, we've been doing this for decades. This comes back to mind. This is actually a patent I have for my prior employer. So this is not really mine, but this is public domain right now, so I think I can use it here. But I wrote all of this. But it was a way to migrate systems without writing any piece of code. So we had kind of a meta model, and we would describe the target data set to match to our source data set. And we had kind of come up with our own way of depicting that and capturing a kind of a schema definition standard. So we did that right at that point in time. So really, it was kind of a beginning point of a metadata and being able to describe that and also act on it in a way that is generic. So that way, I would really truly understand the incoming data from a target system that I have to migrate and put it into a billing system. This was for a telecom billing company. And we kind of use this for a lot of large telecom carriers, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, all of those. We're using this particular system. So it kind of all comes back, right? So it's the same concept, but this time around, machine is the consumer of this piece. So let's kind of do a deep down dive into understanding what exactly is a context, right? Some of you may have seen this slide from my CDO IQ presentation, but agents don't really know your business. Consider a scenario, right? A high value cancellation for a telecom company. I used to work for that for about 14 years or so. So, telecom, Sarah calls and says, "Hey, I want to cancel my internet service." And her customer ID is available, her monthly spend is available, contract status, support tickets, and all of that. And the AI's logic or an agent's logic without the context is, hey, Sarah is a month-to-month customer with low digital engagement, and let her cancel, right? So, in fact, it might do so with very little friction. That's kind of part of the customer experience. When they want out, right? So, it might even make it easy to do that piece. But then let's say we add context, right? So, what does context really, how does that come into play? This is a high value cancellation, right? Because there's a relationship context. Somehow it was captured as code and was made available. The system will see that Sarah is not just a 120 per month customer. She's CEO of a local startup that just signed a 50K enterprise contract with the same company. And sentiment context is like, the last three support calls, she was not quite happy. And market context, there's a competitor that has launched a similar service. And business policies also state that don't lose a B2B decision maker, even on their personal accounts. I know this for a fact because I used to work for telecom. There was a policy like this, and we frequently had to kind of, implement that logic as well. So this is true, right? But look at the context. With this much of context, the decision the agent might make should be significantly different. Here's how it might look, right? A traditional AI without the context might just cancel. Have a nice day. We make a generic offer, follows a standard retention workflow, right? Hey, I'll give you 3 months off, or I'll give you a discount, whatnot, kind of a thing. Whereas with the context, I see you have three outages lately. I've alerted our regional tech to kind of fix it. I might offer a VIP executive bundle. You might trigger a white glove response because this is not a just a consumer, it's actually a B2B decision maker. So I'm going to escalate to the enterprise account manager to give a call and take care of the situation. Right, so that's kind of really how context kind of comes into play. So let's take a look at the various context components that might exist in today's world. So what really makes up of the context? So in simple words, right, it's the meaning, it's the relationships, it's the rules, it's history, the situation. So when I use the term enterprise context layer, this is what I mean. It's not simply another database. It's the collection and delivery of business meaning, relationships, rules, history, situational information needed by AI to kind of interpret and sort of behave appropriately. The context includes all of these things, right? The semantics, the master reference data, relationships between entities. These are simple things. We have these things today for the most part. If you're using a Snowflake, Databricks, or modernizing it using Azure Fabric, you will have most of those components. And some may even have a lot of unstructured data, like they may bring in their wiki, SharePoint, playbooks, standard operating procedures, and all of that. Historical interactions, right? Historical data, policies, business rules, policy as a code we talked about, not losing a B2B customer. So that kind of information, all of those things kind of collectively make up of the context in today's enterprise. So then what, right? So really, there are four key areas that we could distill all of these into. The semantics, right? It's usually a evolution of your data lake. Once you land your data, you curate those golden data sets, and then you kind of build out a semantic layer that is business friendly, that everybody can trust, and the rules or the principles of all the metrics are really laid out clear, right? So that everybody agrees to that. That's kind of a basic definition of a semantic layer from a practical standpoint. So, for example, a database column like this may get translated to monthly recurring revenue. Tenure might get translated to 4-year loyalty milestone. But this has a temporal, a time nature to it because as this increases, this might change. So this is not a one and done type of tag you apply, but it's a continuous process. Enterprise flag equal to true may not make sense to humans unless you're a systems, a developer of sorts or a data engineer. But it's really a B2B decision maker. That's what it means, right? And so that kind of enables these agentic actions, financial forecasting, benchmarking, high priority VIP escalation, those type of things. Semantics bring meaning, right? So let's say that's part one of the concept. Part two is the entity resolution. People call this MDM mastering, but really Sarah, in our example, could have existed in multiple places, right? And the fact that you didn't have a match between the billing side and the CRM side, basically lost a connection to identify that she's also a startup CEO, right? So that's kind of where a golden record principle comes in, right? You bring everything together, you mix it, match it, and then you have a standard, a master list of the key entities like customers, items, products, and you name it. There's a range of those things that you would master. And that's critical because it helps agent identify specific actions which might miss it otherwise. So let's say that's the second. The third one is the knowledge graph. This is not very common. It is also a little more complex to implement, maintain, and manage. But it brings a very important aspect that is missed in a lot of other models that we may have, like for example, a regular relational model or a star schema. Here, where Sarah is the CEO of a startup who is also a tier one partner, right? That kind of relationships can be captured. And I'll show you some of that from a demo standpoint, how that kind of helps. If you are asking a question, if an agent is looking to act on a certain aspect of it, it can inject that and it can get a variety of like relationships, right? And each of those relationships can be interpreted because AI LLMs can reason. And because of that, it becomes a lot powerful than simply asking it to run a particular query. This kind of comes to life in the demo here in the next few minutes here. So the last one is cognitive maps. So really, this is all of the policies that exist in your organization. Is it kind of tacit policies sometimes and overt policies, which are actually captured as standard operating procedures, playbooks, operation run books and things like that, right? So this is all business facing, systems facing, it's everything, right? But how do you kind of implement those policies as a code? How do you sort of create the step-by-step sequencing? So for example, in case of Sarah, it would have skipped all of the process and would have just escalated the situation to the enterprise account manager, right? As opposed to going through step one, two, three, which is kind of a dumb process. A human would have done that. So you want your agents to do the same thing. And that's kind of where the cognitive maps come in. So those are like your 4 building blocks. Let's kind of keep that in mind as we kind of next go into where exactly is the kind of context footprint sit within an enterprise. Are we talking about a new product or do I have to buy one more product? I've got data query, master data management, I've got data lakes. It's just tool explosion, right? So what exactly is this context? So let's kind of peel the layers there a little bit. Context is about convergence. It's not about another data store or a platform. It is about sort of bringing the context that is all over the place because there was no intention to kind of bring that together. You may have just collected it inadvertently, right? In some cases, more intentionally, but it's all over the place. But sort of bringing that together and assembling it in a way it is ready for consumption. That's really what we are talking about. The job at hand is to identify where all such context data exists and how do I sort of bring that together. You may not have to make a copy of it, but you will be in a way you will be able to in runtime point an agent's request and infuse that with the right context and then hand it off, right? So you might intercept the request coming in, add context, and then send it back, right? So that's kind of when the prompt goes in an enriched way. Your LLM will do a phenomenal job, right? You think it might be doing that today, but it'll fall apart because, and I'll show you some examples of how it exactly operates when you hit a particular query. And so there's really three types here. An embedded context, right? You have several tools like your data platform, Snowflake, Databricks. Azure is making much more strides in that direction. They have Fabric IQ and Foundry, which collectively you can implement an ontology kind of a layer there. MDMs are gravitating more towards including this kind of context. Catalogs are doing that. Other systems are all doing, but I call all of those as embedded context. They all have that context within their ecosystem, right? Nothing good or bad about it, and there's a whole pros and cons we can get into there. The standalone context is really as an enterprise deciding that there are tools available in the market and you can go after that and they will not replace but they will kind of leverage your existing footprint and then using that to kind of infuse the context and then work hand in hand with those existing systems. The third one is really the federated hybrid context. This is where the world will go most likely because there are some constraints in an embedded context. You may not do everything you want. Sorry about that. It was on mute. I don't know how somebody broke through that. But basically, embedded context and then the federated hybrid is where we will go because there are some constraints with the first two. And how do you kind of balance that and implement. Again, context layer doesn't have to own all the context. It needs to know how to discover, connect, govern, and assemble the right context at the right time. So going into a little more details here, like, what it means and, what are some of the examples of embedded context, knowledge graphs here in case of standalone context layers. Federated hybrid might use a combo of your master data management systems, your lakehouse graphs, document drag, and all of that. So if you do that, you will need like an integration sort of a layer, right? Something that brings it together and creates some consumption mechanisms. So that's kind of where we think the world will go. And we're seeing a lot of interest and some initial signs as well from where the requirements might kind of go, given the other players in that ecosystem. So that's a pattern from a context standpoint. So if you take a look at, evolving from semantics today, I have semantics. Do I have to build a context layer as well, right? There are two different things because semantics is 25% of your context, you could argue. You remember those four building blocks I said? It's one part of the context. And so today, semantic modernization solves what does the data mean? How is the KPI exactly implemented? And context expansion begins to solve what does the business mean within that context. So, for example, you have structured data assets. You pull all that into your data lake, and you might have a domain data lake, which is like a hub and spoke type stuff. Powers your dashboards, And one of the important things we see is a lot of the requests coming in tend to come into this angle, the natural query language. Everybody wants to enable their co-pilots to work with their data sets, right? And so they want to turn that on. And generally, what happens is it doesn't understand, it doesn't do a great job. And that's kind of where semantic layer becomes top of mind. And organizations implement that. And once you feed that semantic understanding and inject it, this path becomes a lot better. So that's one path, right? But what I'm saying is there is unstructured data assets. That's usually not every company will actively pulling that together until now, right? With agents, you will need to probably do that, and that's kind of the thesis statement. It's all of those documents, you bringing them as policy as a code, you're mastering your knowledge graphs, and that essentially becomes a complete context layer that powers your existing assets, and it injects the context where it's required, not just with the natural query language, but also any governed intelligent consumption. Really a more complex name for agents, right? When they are querying, you can inject that context layer and kind of take it from there. So again, just to summarize, semantics, metrics, calculation, all of these. Context is more about business rules, terminology, and all of those type of things. So the broader context is that, future evolution can build on that foundation. Your semantic may just be a starting point, right? So it's not something that you throw away, but you kind of build on top of that from that standpoint. So that's one concept. Where exactly does this fit in, right? So think of this footprint here. You have all your source data assets on this side, and then you have all of your medallion architecture, if you're sort of implementing it that way, your gold zone, and you're activating that. Your context intelligent framework sits here, right? Where it could intercept API calls, it could intercept, any agentic requests that's coming in. It does need a Frontier LLM foundation. Frontier or an SLM too, a small language model, depending on your use case. That also gives you some options for optimizing your costs and so on. So those four factors all sort of bringing that context together kind of sits there and works in tandem with your data lake architecture from an enterprise standpoint. So that's the footprint. Now let's take a look at really the one optimization point. Most companies we see are experimenting with agents, and they tend to work well in prototypes or proof of concepts. But when you want to deploy that, that's kind of where some of the complexity is coming in. It's really about building that enterprise context layer that suits that agent, right? So you want to have a common context pattern for not just that one agent, but for many agents that will come. So you want to use one agent to kind of back into a context layer. But as you're adding agents, you're not fragmenting that context assembly. You're kind of bringing that together, right? And so it just begins to form and become part of your rest of your ecosystem. So you have customers where we're implementing some agentic solutions. We'll take that path. We'll kind of build out a context layer that eventually will become their enterprise context layer. But if you go to your CFO and say, hey, we need funding for context layer, one, it's complicated to explain. Second, it's all plumbing stuff. Understand, context is not the destination. Context is just an enabler. So I just paid for all the plumbing. You want some more money for plumbing, right? So that'll be a kind of a different conversation. But whereas if you can show the value to the agent, and as you back into the enterprise context layer, that just becomes a sweet spot from how you can evolve the maturity of your own context layers within the enterprise. So are we on time? 12:30. Okay, so I have a quick demo here. Let's just see. I wanted to do this live. It's always dangerous when you do this. So this is our context accelerator. As you would imagine, a lot of the context, logic and principles are just back-end driven. There's not much we can demo about. So what we've done is sort of built a simple interface on top of that CoStrategix like enterprise context accelerator to kind of demonstrate this piece, right? And some of you may have seen this from my other conference presentation. We've improved the quality of it, but the way we demo it is kind of consistent. So we can ask questions here, and it'll run it with the context and without the context. Now, what is making up of the context, right? If you ask that, if you go into the docs here, this is actually a fictitious transportation logistics company. All the data was sort of synthetically produced using AI at this point. So here, what we're doing, we're throwing all the billing rules, the carrier performance guidelines. This is a transportation logistics where they kind of negotiate the route and the truck that comes and picks up stuff and fulfills the delivery aspects of it, the different policies. So as and when you throw a document at this, it actually automatically like extracts the relationships from that. Of course, you can guide it and you can, make I wasn't supposed to do that. Oops. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened there. But anyway, so I can actually click here. So basically, what's a poor performing lane, right? It's related to the first tender acceptance. Finance team watches that. Customer success team watches that. Margin depends on that. Capacity operations team watches that and looks for that in a very so this is a graph database and it kind of surfaces these relationships automatically. And you can actually approve it or disapprove it and kind of enhance it. But that's kind of the value that the accelerator is bringing. Most cases, you have to model it. Here, we are applying AI to help itself, right? So in data management, we kind of using that to surface these relationships and then kind of paint a pane of glass for the data analyst to kind of help. Semantic maps, policies, you can throw any documents at this piece. But anyway, so that kind of it builds a layer of context based on all the documents that you throw at it. It might surface certain things, like it might say, hey, poor performing lane definition is such and such, right? Where this is less than 85%. And, what is the source? Where am I getting that from? Understand these documents can be updated, right? So this is a live pipeline. So it can go fetch a revised version 3.3 and just replace that piece of the context and keep it up to date, right? So that's the other value add here. Then again, on-time delivery and all of this, and as a governance professional on your team, right? You can approve it. You can work with the business stakeholders and verify that what it's finding is okay or not, and you can reject it. A little workflow just in this demo, but in reality, that might play out differently, right? That might be a lot of the setup work that we would do to kind of get this up and going. So that's kind of the base description. Let's kind of hit a button here. Which customers experienced the largest margin decline this quarter? So what we are trying to do here is run two sets of queries, right? And one goes without the context, and then the other one goes with the context. And then we can kind of explore what documents did one use and uh, which and the other one where there was nothing available, he did not use it. And how did the two queries kind of compare, right? So this is a context engine disabled. And it says, hey, Sunshine Citrus Packers was the top one, right? Question is, which customer experienced the largest margin decline this quarter and why, right? So you'll see that there was no terms, no graphs, no documents, and basically it created its own SQL, and you'll see it's quite complex. it didn't say, no, I cannot answer that. It'll figure it out and it gave you some results. But let's say with the context on the other side, right? Very different set of results here. Like when you see here, cardinal health was top. It wasn't sunshine, citrus packers. So why is it different? Because there was one approved governed definition that it used. And because of that, the entire answer changed, right? And so the term it basically used was the margin decline quarter over quarter. There's really a definition based on this customer company standards that, this is how we measure it. And so it basically applied that principle. And because of that, the records that it fetched was completely different. You see how contextually human can understand that, and they would have gone to the right data set by either writing a query or going to the right reports, whatnot. But in this case, with the context, you end up one way, without the context, another way. And if you also look at this SQL statement, it's very compact. And that also says that your route to fetching your data sets will be very efficient. And this is key because it simply costs you money, right? More consumption, the agents are using to do these things. You don't know how many times an agent might query this because there's a concept of agent loops, right? Until it gets the right response, it might go back and forth. You're essentially losing control. When you had dashboards, the consumption that this business team looks it up 5 times, and more so in the last week of the month. And you know how much you will have to pay for your Snowflake consumption. But whereas here, right, that control is also going away. So the FinOps, right, and the efficiency with which you can serve all becomes important. So context layer is helping in a couple of ways, especially if you want to present your CFO. The cost efficiency side might not be a bad idea. So then it also looks at the different docs and different graphs that it is tapped into. Again, what an address customer, depends on time. And you can see some of that relationships and some where it was just a standalone sort of a concept which was not necessarily tied. That's an example, of how with context you can kind of find a very dramatic different outcomes. And if you also compare this to the way we turn off the light with the original example I set up, now think about that kind of human context as well, right? This is more definitions and how you interpret. So it's more wide angle than what we might assume. So that's a little demo there, and sure there may be some questions, and happy to take that at the end here. I have just a few slides to bring this to home. So we talked about this. So context readiness, like, okay, I get it. I understand why it's important. I see what the components are. I see how the architecture, might look like. What does readiness look like, right? So there's about 6 dimensions we use, right? The business meanings, syntax, and semantics. How fragmented are they? Are they developing, established, agent ready, right? And for each customer, we kind of assign some of these weights, and we can calculate a score or readiness score based on that. And we look at specific things under each of these areas, and identity, master data, where do we stand? Where's the enterprise knowledge, SharePoint? How is it governed and used? Are there principles built in for appropriate versioning and ownership, and making sure they're updated when actual policies change and things like that? So these are like the 6 things you can do that, and you can do. But when you do right, like 0 to 339 or so, fairly fragmented, which is generally where organizations are. And again, you can see this graduating level of the score and where one might fall. But the important point here is you don't have to be in the 80 to 100 to declare agent readiness. In fact, it's the other way around, right? And that might kind of lead to the next section, how do we kind of get started? So here's where, right, the context trailhead is where you identify the agent use case first. You don't want to start with buying or evaluating a context layer. You don't want to go off and spend cycles on assembling a context. That's kind of what used to happen in the old school BICC, business intelligence centers of competence. You would go, or even big data. I would go amass all the data from all over, right? And then post COVID, every company was like, wow, I'm paying so much for big data. What is the value, right? So you really want to value engineer this. Like first identify the use case and see what decisions that it needs to make an agentic use case. What context is required to make that decisions in a sound, governed, grounded manner, right? And then what do you have, like, in your databases, in your knowledge reports, wherever, right? And what is its current state and accessibility and so on. So those give you gaps, and that kind of should lead to an architecture. So don't start with the tool, start with the business use case, right? So that's really the key point. So we have a context readiness assessment. We do, kind of methodically go about it in a way that you can create these roadmaps, especially in view of what agentic pursuits you may have, right? And if you don't, and if you need that, that's another assessment as well to identify the hot areas within your value chain or value drivers in your company and where the friction is, and identify here's where an agent can come in and mitigate that friction for you, right? So that's something we can also help with. And then, as you are implementing those agents, the concept of this accelerator kind of kicks in, and looking at your ecosystem, what the technology choices you have, and what those bring to the table, we can take this logical accelerator and customize it. It's actually a piece of code, and you will have intellectual property access to it, a license to it, and so that we can kind of implement. So there's also like a context playbook that we have that Ari will kind of send it out as a follow up to this webinar. Last one is an agent framework, right? If you are deploying agent, you know IT teams quickly can whip one up, right? But there is concepts of memory management, observability, and standardization. And how do I govern all these agents? If everybody creates one, how am I going to, sort of ensure that it's providing the right business outcomes? What if one stops working and it's embedded as part of my critical workflow process? That's kind of where an agentic framework comes in. So we can deploy that. On top of that, you can build agents very quickly. And then the context will help that agents be grounded and do the work, right? So this is how we are kind of building accelerators, a plethora of that. For observability, we have something, and so we kind of can bring that together and create that maturity for your enterprise. So what are the key takeaways? Right. First is access is not equivalent to understanding. Your models or LLMs don't actually get better over time on their own, right? They're simply predicting the next best word when you send requests. And it's really a body of work from a context standpoint that you have to infuse and send it as part of the prompt to get the right answers that you're looking for. And that kind of context already exists in your organization, but you need assembly from that standpoint. Context layer is not the destination, it is an enabler, right? So don't start the pursuit of the context layer itself, but start with an agent and solve for the business needs, and then figure out what the context is that it needs, and then bring that together. But do so in a way that can be extensible, that it can scale with other agents as well. So you want to have that footprint, start small, but build towards that vision. And so at the end of about 10, 15 agents, you could say we have a context layer, right? So that's really uh, an architectural takeaway from this. So that's everything I had. But just quickly, we have strategy, advisory, data platform modernization. digital product engineering and AI intelligent automation. That's kind of where a lot of the agentic work is happening today. Those are our practice pillars. And, that's my last slide. Just want to tee it off with, what context does your enterprise, first enterprise agent need? Have you come into any contact so far? I'd love to hear any comments, any questions, or to address any of the questions and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so anybody just feel free to submit your questions into the chat, and we'll definitely get to those. Just right now, a couple of questions came in. The first one is, how do you test and troubleshoot your context processes?
So really, I think you're in a way referring to an agent observability process. So agent is your point of consumption, and it is also something that reasons and acts. So if you're looking to troubleshoot, means the trouble is caused by an agent. And agent can do a lot of things if you let it run. You hear things about how an agent actually break through the firewall and hacked another company's systems. And and they're building these swarms, right, of agents to mimic a social network and kind of learn from it. So we don't need data from actual Reddits and things like that, because we can actually synthetically produce that data, right? So yeah. So anyway, your question on how we can do that falls under the area of agent observability. You can build those guardrails. You can see those, the way, if you use our agent framework, there is a whole logging infrastructure, and you can have agents watch that. So your agents are doing your business job, and then you have another agent that is watching that, right? So you're using AI to also build those kind of guardrails, right? Again, you have to keep an eye on your token costs, and there are ways to doing that as well. But that would be my response to that.
Okay, we had another question come in. Some people say that context engineering is just advanced prompt engineering. What's your opinion on that?
You can do that because you cannot really, without availability of the context, you can say, hey, use it in this form. But if that data or, the views or the semantics or, the maps were not really truly available for the LLM through a vector or through a graph RAG database, it's not going to, generate that. So yeah, it's not about improving your prompts. It just needs context. Going back to the simple example, I can provide a sensor, I can provide a switch, but the context has to come from wide angle awareness. Right? Humans just walk around and collect that, but that's not the case with agents, right? So you have to find ways to capture and syndicate that context to make it more effective.
Okay, and this is the last question that I have so far. So if you have any other questions, be sure to get them in, because this is the last one that we have so far. Models will not naturally learn your business once they're deployed. Do you feel this is accurate, or is this just a misconception?
Models are simply piecing the next response for you, right? When you ask a question, they're not learning about your context. It's something that we have to do to keep that context updated in real time and infuse that accordingly into the subsequent requests that are going into the LLM. But with that changing context, up-to-date context, they become much more precise and grounded and behave the way exactly that you want them to work, right? So yeah, no, there's no free beer here, so you have to do the work. There's one more
A
question.
couple more questions have come through. The first one is, what are some expected challenges with this other than justifying to your CFO?
I think I think the really the journey we see is really getting started with agentic, POCs. It's easy. Many do that, and some of your team members may already have built it. And look what this does, right? So that novelty is going to kind of fade away because the complexity of really letting it run in production requires a lot of different things, and that is going to be discovered as you kind of do that. That may become a challenge, right? And so that's one way to mitigate is to kind of be more intentional about that piece. And if you are, then, how do I, figure out my existing use case? Technically, another challenge could be all of my tools have some context. All of them are talking the same language. So how do I discern which one actually stays and which one is just marketing jargon, right? So that's a real challenge, right? You really have to poke into whatever tool you have because I've seen some MDMs. They're doing some serious work, but I'm also kind of biased, for from a point of view of embedded things because once it's embedded, context is a very precious thing, and I want a wide angle view to that context. Having it embedded within that, I'm kind of hostage. I would like to use the capability of 3 or 4 tools in my ecosystem, which I've already purchased, and I want to be able to build that context and inject, right? So that would be my bias, but it largely depends on your context as well. That might be another challenge there. Um, can multi-agent orchestration help overcome the context?
So actually, we have a few questions more, Nan, that have come through, and we might not have time for all of them, but your thoughts on bringing in unstructured data. Is RAG the only way to go? That may be very expensive. Other quick ways to harness unstructured data for context building, POCs, etc.
So you can, RAG is not very expensive. It depends on how much data are we talking about. Simple vector DBs, the services are, becoming lower, and you can chunk it and you can definitely use it. That's almost a requirement. That's a good architectural pattern. I wouldn't I would look at the cost angle much more carefully rather than deviate from a sound architectural pattern at start. But happy to talk to you on a specific use case there. Now, GraphRag is also to be decided, right, on the specific context. That might add more operational complexity. Even teams might not have the knowledge of how to maintain, manage, but they're also available as cloud services, right? And some of the larger, like data lakes, also package the the graph relationships within their footprint. So you don't have to go to a Neo4j kind of standalone implementation. So that would be another aspect as well, that you could leverage what you may have rather than some standalone service offering, a cloud service, to kind of do the chunking from that standpoint.
Okay, moving on to the next one, and we'll see if we can get to both of these. We may or may not, but can multi-agent orchestration help overcome the context overload problem in AI agents?
I can't say that multi-agents cause context overload. See, context is something that you apply or you make it available to the agents so they can work better. So if you have one big job and you have one agent to do that, the amount of context will be quite large. And when you inject that many instructions, right, it's like telling my high schooler to go, to a grocery, pick up that, inflate the tires because it's fall and, fill the gas. You give multi instructions, chances that they'll do that all in that format, begins to kind of go down, right? You may want to give a little more bite-sized instruction. So that's kind of where an agent decomposition needs to occur. I'm a huge proponent of that. You don't actually give big tasks to one agent. You break it down. You might have an assembly agent. You might have an agent to go refer a certain knowledge corpus. You might have a composing agent. You might actually have a compliance checker, and then you have a guard agent that kind of guards the progress across the board, right? So as you break it down, your ability to infuse context very accurately kind of goes up, right? So yeah, that is definitely answer would be yes to that.
Well, I wanted to say thank you to everybody. It looks like we're at time now. We do have a couple of more questions that we'll take offline and follow up with the questioner. And if anybody has any follow-up questions afterwards, please feel free to get in touch with us, with me, with Nan, with any of your sales reps. And we will be sending out the recording of this presentation afterwards. So look forward to seeing that in your emails. And thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you all for your time. Hope that was beneficial. I'd love to hear feedback. Please let me know. Thank you.